Hey everyone, I'm back with Sophia again.
Hello.
What are we gonna talk about, babe?
Mm, gun control.
Really?
Yeah,
What do you think about
true.
gun control?
I think it's a largely ineffective and very difficult to implement policy
Hmm. And why is that?
because there's just too many guns. Everyone in this country has a gun and an extra one for their dog.
I mean, if you could hypothetically, now I don't support this personally, but if you could hypothetically like remove the guns from the people, like take them away somehow.
Take them away. I don't think that's possible. See, I think that's a great idea, but I just don't think it's possible.
So you do support the idea.
I support it in theory, but I think it's impossible. So it's and any attempt to implement it is only going to harm hobbyists and people who are not having these sort of negative intentions because there's just so many guns out there that like if somebody wants to do something awful, they can do it.
Mhm. So would you say that it only harms so-called responsible gun owners?
Yes.
Hmm.
I suppose I'm a chud, but that's just my position on this.
You're a child.
I'm a chud.
um, I have a little bit of a different view on this because I don't really support like mass bannings on firearms. I mean like literally every country has a little bit of gun control, like
Mhm.
some form of gun control. You know, we don't allow you to have artillery and stuff like that. Um, and so
True.
I think something like fairly modest, like say a red flag law, which would essentially take the guns out of the hands of someone who is diagnosed with like a mental illness or poses a threat to society or someone in their family. I think having a system in place to alert the police about someone like that, to either prevent them from buying guns or to come to their house and buy back or seize the guns from them for a limited period of time until they show like that they're not an imminent threat any longer. I think something like that is necessary given all of these shootings that have happened primarily by people who are mentally disturbed in some way.
Mhm. I mean, I kind of feel like that was kind of the function of the Patriot Act, or at least the function that the Patriot Act was meant to serve.
Hmm.
Um, I think the government has sort of proven themselves unable to effectively implement that sort of policy, though,
Hmm.
and I think that um, this will just kind of largely lead to more type of like manhunty behavior where people are sort of being unfairly persecuted for their um, for wanting to own a firearm and that sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah. I I don't know if the Patriot Act was for that. Could you elaborate on that?
So the whole mass spying on American citizens
Hmm.
in order to, improve safety, just kind of seems like, in effect, it was intended to combat domestic terrorism and these sort of mass shootings, but it just seems like it doesn't work at all, and these red flags are never really tripped when they should be.
Hmm. I mean, I think it hasn't like I don't know if the kind of proposal I'm talking about has really even been implemented because like I see what you're saying. Like, we just started spying on everybody, and it didn't prevent terrorism. Arguably, the war on terrorism caused more terrorism.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, like, if it's really narrowly targeted, if, I don't know, we had some kind of way that doctors could inform the government that you have violent behaviors, for example, or violent tendencies,
Mhm.
and you had that person on a something like a registry or a list, then you wouldn't like we wouldn't be seeing like massive amounts of data about people being leaked. It would just be about this one very particular area. And we already have something kind of like this.
Mhm.
We already have a system where people who are a threat to themselves or others uh, are deemed as such at the discretion of doctors, and they're involuntarily committed to hospitals. I think it wouldn't be that different to have those same doctors say to whoever is in charge of controlling firearms, hey, this person shouldn't be sold a gun. So when they go to gun store and they do the background check, they see that red flag pop up and they can't buy one. If it's really narrowly targeted like that, I think we could avoid the problems of mass surveillance.
Mm, I definitely can see where you're coming from with that.
Mhm.
Although I think another issue may emerge because of that. I think people may be less likely to make these doctor visits in the first place if it's going to result in them losing access to firearms.
Yeah,
Especially since, you know, a lot of Americans see that as a fundamental right and something that they've enjoyed since a very young age, and probably if these sort of policies are in place, they're going to be quite scared of even setting foot in a doctor's office.
yeah, that's a really good point. I need to think about that. Because the thing is, I knew somebody who was really into firearms who was refusing to get any kind of mental help that he probably needed because he liked them. Actually, I've known multiple people like this. And I I just have to wonder how big a group of people that is, because if people felt less compelled to have them in the first place, like less like they had to have them, um, I think that number of people would go down. But I also think it's impossible to calculate the amount of people that are like this.
Yeah.
If I had to go off of my intuition, it would be like kind of a radical minority.
Yeah, and even if there was any way to calculate it, like there's no way people are going to openly like answer these questions that the government is asking of them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if we're gonna take away our guns, you're still gonna go to the doctor, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess you're right. Yeah, it seems like there's some inherent flaws in this. But then, like, I'm left to wonder, like what exactly can be done, because besides, you know, organizing around mental health and trying to improve care on that front.
That's the bad part. I think there's next to nothing that can be done about the problem of massive gun crime in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Very scary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are countries though. Well, there are people who would argue that, well, there are countries that got rid of most of the guns or all of the guns, and those countries don't have a gun problem because all the guns are gone. But what with 3D printing now, and also smuggling techniques becoming more and more advanced, it seems to me like, sure, the number might go down if you have less guns in the hands of people, but there will still be people with them, and it will be exclusively the people who are dangerous.
Right.
Yeah, so I feel like there's got to be a way to reduce the amount of like crazy people who have them, though, right?
Yeah, you see, like I've thought about this a lot, but I if there is a way, I can't think of it. I don't know what it would be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what's the average Canadian opinion on this? It's like get rid of most of them, right?
Yeah, so that's the main thing is most Canadians don't really want guns around, except for the more rural ones, and also the native population as well. They enjoy their hunting rifles. But generally, like the people who do have guns in Canada that are the main source of the problem are people that are importing them from across the border, and it's very difficult to stop that. All in all, because the border is so wide.
Yeah, so I mean, if you crack down on the guns in the United States, then there'd be less in Canada, right?
Yes, if you can crack down on the guns in the United States, which is, I'd say, not an easy problem to solve.
I mean, I don't really know where Americans would get them from then at that point, because, you know, guns are more regulated in Mexico than they are in the US. But a lot of the cartel guns, the guns that the cartel has, come from the US. Recently there was this agreement between the two countries that made it to where the ATF would crack down on gun smuggling if Mexico did more to crack down on fentanyl smuggling. So it seems like there's this big problem like in the middle of all of this, like dead right in the center, that's fueling this violence in the countries above and below it. So I know that there's countries in Central America that have like a completely laissez-faire attitude about guns, where you can get stuff there you can't even get in America. And maybe those would start being the new firearms hub that like they go into Mexico, then they go up into America. But I'd have to imagine that would be a way smaller amount because that's a long way to travel just to get like an AK-47.
Yeah, very true. Um, I guess the problem I'd say would be like the existing guns.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think gun control could be implemented in the United States with like a very long time horizon,
Mm-hmm.
like the 30 to 50 years type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I think improvements would start to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
But until then, like there's too many guns already in circulation. People can easily hide them or not give them up or whatever they plan on doing. And I'm sure a lot of Americans too would stand their ground with that sort of thing, and but it wouldn't willingly hand them over to authorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, I have to wonder about some of this because like it it confuses me a little bit. Like, what would compel someone to hold on to these things that they're probably barely using if it meant that significantly less people would die? Like, maybe this is just kind of an urban mindset, but I think if, like, America is a very rural country, so to some extent guns are necessary.
Yeah.
But some of the guns that we allow are definitely not. Like, you're not going to be taking out a bear or a wild boar with an AR-15, and yet that's the most popular gun in America. I think some of these, they're completely unnecessary. Like, if there were an authoritarian or tyrannical government that emerged, then like, yeah, it would be pretty necessary to have them.
Yeah.
But um, in the modern day, uh, with a standing army and with institutions that are, largely preventing a like Nazi seizure of power in America, we don't really need these things. And moreover, like, they wouldn't do a lot of damage against an army that literally has like drones and all this highly advanced weaponry. I think whatever resistance there would be quashed. And so
Right.
the idea that like we have these things at all, I think it's a little silly. I mean, New Zealand, you can get handguns there, you can get all kinds of hunting rifles and shotguns. You can't get AR-15s anymore. They did that because there was a mass shooting involving one. I think, I think that's a reasonable policy if we could just get people to give them up, and that remains to be seen.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you about your whole point about how these are not really needed. Like I don't think anybody needs any sort of semi-automatic rifle. Honestly, that might be just me coming from a very Canadian perspective, but I think that's very overkill in and of itself. Although I think that it goes much deeper than the logical reason for a lot of people. I think a lot of people have a very emotional attachment to their firearms and also the safety that it makes them feel. I believe that I think that a gun is kind of a gun in terms of its danger in mass shooting situations. The most deadly school shooting in American history was the Virginia Tech shooting, which was perpetrated using only 2 handguns.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree that firearms that aren't as powerful as, say, an AR-15 or an AK-47 can certainly be used in very deadly ways if the people who are wielding them know how to do so. But the vast majority of people who are going to perpetuate a horrendous act like that aren't going to know how to use them that way. And so I think reducing the amount of guns that are more easily deadly, that they can more easily be used in a deadly way, I think reducing the amount of those, while it may not make as big of an impact as we would like to see, I think it would make an impact because while that one was the biggest one, so many of the other biggest ones were used using these semi-automatic, quote-unquote assault-style weapons with the AR skeleton or the AK platform.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to disagree with that. I think that even if it made a small change, it probably would have some sort of impact. And even you could argue that even if it saves one life or like, even a single life could be worth that change because every individual has a lot of value. But at the same time, you also have to consider all the people that are just using it lawfully and don't have these sort of intentions in mind. And I think that these sort of regulations can be unfair to them, even if they're just hobbyists. Like, America is kind of known for their gun culture, and even though these horrendous acts do happen, I think it would be very difficult to change that culture because so many people are just so invested in it.
Yeah, I mean, something being a part of a culture doesn't make it a good part of a culture. But I do agree that it would be difficult to change. That's kind of the difficult thing here because we're talking about potential solutions, but like as to whether or not people would accept the solutions is like a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And I feel like that's kind of where the problem lies, because I think we sort of agree that, these guns, especially the more military style weapons, can be quite dangerous in the wrong hands, and if at all possible, like, we should work to keep these things out of people's hands. But for me, the main barrier just lies in the fact that it doesn't seem really remotely possible to actually carry out one of these bans.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the original assault weapons ban was passed in the 90s with broad bipartisan support, but they couldn't even muster up the support to renew that pre-existing ban. So I don't see any reform happening at the federal level anytime soon, or perhaps ever. And so it is kind of just a theoretical discussion to have, but part of the reason why we do have those discussions is to perhaps change hearts and minds.
Right.
But also part of the problem with that is that a lot of people's hearts and minds have been changed, but they're not being represented. There are people who are Republicans in districts that overwhelmingly support gun control, but they don't vote that way. And so I do think there needs to be a serious push to talk about these issues in an honest and meaningful way, and to push the politicians to represent the people. I think, like, as someone who has shot an AR-15 and enjoyed the experience of doing so quite a lot, I would own one if I could afford one. If there was some like sweeping policy change that caused that to be banned in this country, I would give up mine immediately because I don't think my recreational leisure is as important as preventing the death of potentially hundreds of people who may be shot by that weapon. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have provisions in the law for self-defense, but you can defend yourself with something that is not this military-grade weapon that could kill hundreds of people very quickly. And so I support people's right to self-defense. I support people's right to bear arms, but certain arms exist purely to kill people or for fun times in one's backyard that don't really amount to much in the face of the sheer amount of people they could kill.
Agreed. I would say though, you mentioned giving it up as like a small price to pay, like you would just be a hobbyist in this case, shooting it for fun, but ultimately that would be millions of Americans, probably tens of millions of Americans who enjoy this right today, who would be no longer able to enjoy that anymore.
And so be it. I mean, I don't think those people's personal pleasure in what's really quite an insignificant thing matters as much as preventing those deaths. And also, in Canada, can you shoot certain like assault style weapons in a very controlled environment?
Yes. So you can go to a gun range and you can rent these firearms and you can shoot them and use them, and a lot of the restrictions that normally would apply do not apply while you're in the vicinity of the gun range, which I think that's really good policy. I think that giving people the right to use these for sport without necessarily legalizing them for home defense or for hunting or for any other uses like that is honestly a really good solution to this. Very, 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 very good point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about these things in terms of leisure, then you can have your leisure in that controlled environment. Um, to be honest, part of the reason why I was so against gun control in the past was because I thought that that view was inconsistent with my support for legalizing all drugs. Now, of course, when I talk about that position, when it comes to individual drugs, I have like very specific ideas about how they could be tightly regulated. But I think the fundamental difference between being libertarian on that position and on this position is one of them is you know you putting a substance in your own body primarily affecting yourself.
Right.
It's possible to affect other people emotionally with it, but
Right.
you're not going to kill somebody by like upsetting them with your potentially irresponsible drug use.
Right.
Whereas with guns, it's the leading cause of death of children in the United States. There are mass shootings that occur every year that kill sometimes hundreds of people. This is something that is leading to the death of other people in massive numbers, simply caused by one individual pulling the trigger and that bullet, hitting another person.
And ruining the life of an entire family.
Yeah, and so, like, while the irresponsible decisions that we make with, for example, drug use may emotionally harm those in our orbit, friends or family, I don't think that is anywhere near that. I don't think that's anywhere near as significant as ending potentially hundreds of lives with one action. That we as individuals can take one action that can literally end the lives or destroy the property of other people.
Yeah, one individual can control the lives of so many people and ruin the lives of so many people using this tool.
Yeah, exactly. And I would not call that freedom. I would call that a direct threat to the freedom of others. And so there needs to be freedom in this society, I think, but up to a point. If it's not up to a reasonable point, then I think it's so much freedom that it actually damages other people's chance at living a free life.
Right. I feel like society has something of a responsibility in its very function to maintain the balance between personal freedom and the collective order of the society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a fair point to say that less guns would bring those a little bit more into alignment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like on a moral level, I definitely agree with your argument.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would be for the best if there was a lot less guns in this country.
Mm-hmm.
But on a practical level, I guess that's just kind of where the disagreement still lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people who have like a view more like your view, like basically defer to the fact that, well, we can't really do anything about it, so like why even talk about it? Or well, you don't say that, but like a lot of people who have the same view say that.
Yeah.
And the reason why I do talk about it and why I think it's important to push for is even if it's a lost cause, even if it ultimately results in failure, I think it's the right thing to do. And that to me is more important than whether or not it'll succeed or whatever utilitarian calculations we might be able to make. If it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see, for example, the leading cause of death among adolescents in America is guns, that
right.
To me is an unconscionable fact. And the fact that so many of us see that and we think that that's just an error on the part of the parents or the people around them. And I'll use this extreme word, sickening to me, that we as a society would allow something like that.
Yeah, and not to mention, I believe it's the leading suicide method as well, just in general in the population.
Yeah.
It's just such a quick thing. You're having a bad couple days, and it's just sitting right there on the rack.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
It's a really sad thing.
Yeah.
Especially what's going on with the youth.
Mm.
And I feel like I feel like by sort of pushing this message that, maybe things have gone too far in terms of personal freedom, I think over time we can make a change, and one day one day America will be in a much better place in this on this issue. And I think that if we need to make changes now, that won't really make too much difference until, even like 30 years down the line. I think it's still worth making those changes now.
Yeah, yeah. Um, that was a really good point. Now I'm trying to remember what I was thinking about. 'Cause I just got so focused on what you were saying. um, yeah, I mean, like, oh yeah, I remember now. You mentioned suicides, and this is something that's very personal to me because I had someone who's in my extended family, a cousin of mine, who she lost her life. She was a high school girl, and she took firearms classes in high school, which is something that exists in Tennessee. I don't know if it exists in other states. My mom used to have them as well.
Right.
But she had a high school class which taught you how to use guns safely, taught you all the precautions. They really go through it like rigorously.
Right.
And all the guns in the house were locked up. Her dad was ex-military, he knew what to do, but she found the key because she had access to that key. She could get into that locked box, and she got a gun and impulsively shot herself. And this was someone who was surrounded by gun safety propaganda, took it in school,
Yeah.
and her father did everything that you're told that you're supposed to do, locking them up, having them in a safe place. She died. And to me, in that situation, the only thing that you can do is to have a law in place that says if you have kids, you shouldn't have those in the home. I think the moment that you have kids, you forfeit the right to have firearms in your home, because if they're mishandled, even if they're handled properly, like in this example, it could lead to the death of your child.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what sort of security measure you impose. Like, if the kid is smart enough, they will find a way to get it.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and in America today, you forfeit your right to drugs if you have a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You forfeit your right to being an alcoholic if your alcoholism is determined to be severe enough. You can actually have your kid taken away.
Yeah.
And I think those are perfectly reasonable things to have in place. If you're abusing addictive substances, you could be erratic or mistreat or abuse your child in some way. I think those are reasonable things to have in place. And yet, we don't do the same thing with guns. And I think it's an error that's led to the accidental deaths or suicides of so many children.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think some people would argue that, they'll find some other way to do it. But I don't think that's true, because I think that suicide can be a very impulsive and in the moment type of thing. Like, oftentimes when you're feeling extremely depressed, you don't have the energy to come up with some grand plan and, carry it out. Like, you just want to be gone because you feel so bad.
Yeah.
And we need more intervention in school. We need people watching for these signs, these mental illness signs. But also, like you said, like, we need to keep guns away from children. I think that it's hard to justify that they should be anywhere near this in the same house as somebody who's still mentally developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think we basically agree on this. I think we agree more than we disagree.
Yeah, I think I've shifted closer to your position a little bit, because I agree that even though it's quite a hopeless outlook, at least in the short term, I think it's important to continue to push for these things, because at the end of the day, like, it's still a measure that will save lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm definitely not against all guns. I think having them for self-defense purposes or hunting or because you live in a rural place is more than fair. But I also think we could design regulations around that. Like I said, take the guns out of households that have kids. But if you live on a farm, maybe there's an exception for you.
I think that there should be a lot of discretion to the people who are investigating these sort of situations.
Yeah. Yeah, although that could be a system that's liable to abuse. And
For
so,
sure.
and so I think we also need to be strengthening our institutions at the same time that we're strengthening mental health um, and getting the guns out. Strengthening the
Yeah.
economic support for people
And
like
even rebuilding trust in the government and in the institutions as well.
yeah, which I think you can only do through making them more accountable to people and more transparent.
Agreed.
And so the gun issue, it's not really just one issue. I think it's a holistic problem that needs to be addressed. But I think the anti-gun control people will point out other issues that need to be addressed that are contributing to gun crime. And then they'll say, well, look, these other issues exist, so it's not really the guns. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. The guns definitely played a part. You needed one to shoot somebody.
Yeah, it's like zero-sum thinking. Like it's either all this or it's all this.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's like partially this and partially this and partially this, and all these factors come together to create a horrible situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if any one of those factors are, if multiple of those factors were dealt with in a better way, then it would stop in its tracks a lot of these atrocious events from ever occurring.
Yeah, I agree. And although I can sort of see their point, for one particular reason, I think doing it like piecemeal, like focusing only on one issue and neglecting to focus on any of the other contributing reasons for gun crime, it might actually increase the rate of gun crime or not do much to solve it, and in so doing, endanger people who would be so-called responsible gun owners. Like for example, if you put in a law that says like I don't know, someone who breaks into your house can't be shot, it's like you might reduce the instances of people being shot unlawfully, murdered in a situation where like you might have been able to run away, you might have been able to prevent it some other way, like
right.
But at the same time, like if you're not addressing all of the reasons for why people would break into your house in the first place, then you're kind of just preventing people from defending themselves and potentially getting them hurt by protecting the criminals with this law. And so I don't think it's all just one thing. I think there are a lot of different things that we need to be doing.
Yeah.
And if we only do one, like solely focusing on the guns, it could lead to situations where people might actually be more likely to get hurt, which is the last thing that you want to see as a result of these policies. Like the goal should be public health. That should be what's in mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this kind of goes back to what you said, like, morally right is morally right, and if we need to, take this problem one step at a time and, address these issues as they come up, I think that would be a reasonable solution to that issue.
Yeah. I'm thinking now. You're giving me a lot of stuff to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think if it were done incrementally, it would have to be done like in the order of what will reduce the most harm first.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like if you bolster the mental health system, give more people access to care, have better, like I was saying, red flag laws in place. I know you disagree with that a bit.
Yeah.
And improved the economic motivators in violent crime as well, access to housing, education, and so on. If we could immediately start addressing these things and then like slowly wean the country off of guns as we're addressing that, I think that could be one solution.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that definitely makes sense. Like gradual would be better in terms of the public relations aspect of the policy. But also, like, I kind of feel like that's kind of what's been tried with gun control so far. Like these, I guess not as all-encompassing as you described, like changing these economic and social factors, but even just like banning specific attachments for firearms and, certain styles of rifles and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think that's too incremental. I think that's too slow.
Too slow. Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that stuff has really made any meaningful difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's a complicated issue.
It is, yeah, very.
Yeah, I just stay in my room all day.
Yeah. He just wants to grow, for God's sakes.
All of these mass shootings, socialism, BLM, KKK, racism, and I just want to grill, for God's sakes.
True.
Well, babe, I was about to say I think we solved gun control. I think we did the literal opposite of that.
It's unsolvable. It's over.
It's over.
The country is doomed.
Well, you're Canadian, so it's fine.
I'm leaving, so yeah, it's fine for me, but the rest of you can have fun.
Yeah. R.I.P.